Rocket Milky Way stranded on a hostile planet, a desperate alien woman stands before a lone human, her piercing gaze filled with urgency. "Let me stay here, and I'll give you what no human woman can," she pleads, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with determination. Banished from her own kind, she has nowhere to go, and the human is her only chance at survival. But what exactly is she offering? And can he trust someone so different, yet so strangely compelling? The wind howled through the barren landscape, whipping across jagged rocks and stirring up clouds of dust that clung to the air like ghosts of a long-dead world. The planet was cold, lifeless, a place where survival was dictated by resilience and sheer force of will. The human stood outside his small shelter, scanning the horizon with a wary expression. His rifle, battered from years of use, rested against his shoulder, though he didn't raise it. Not yet. She stood before him, her violet skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the twin moons. Her silver eyes locked onto his, unreadable yet filled with something raw, something urgent. The torn remnants of her once elegant clothing clung to her frame, evidence of a fall from power, from a place where she had once been untouchable. Now, she was just another exile, cast out into the cruel emptiness of this planet, searching for a way to survive. The human's grip tightened around the weapon, though he hadn't decided whether she was a threat. Everything about her presence radiated desperation, but desperation could be dangerous. "You're alone," she said finally, her voice smooth but edged with something sharp beneath its surface. "You have no one." He didn't respond, just narrowed his eyes. He'd spent too many years alone to care for words that meant nothing. The universe had its own rules, and one of them was clear: no one did anything without expecting something in return. She took a step forward, her movements slow, deliberate. "Let me stay here," she continued, her gaze never wavering. "And I'll give you what no human woman can." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Her words carried weight, but their meaning remained just out of reach. He studied her, searching for deception, for the edge of a trap, but all he found was resolve. "You're making a lot of assumptions," he said at last, his voice low, cautious. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Am I wrong?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. She wasn't wrong, not entirely. He had chosen isolation for a reason, had built his life in the emptiness of this world to escape the chaos of humanity. But that didn't mean he trusted her. "You think offering a deal will make me forget why you're here?" he asked, his voice measured. "Exiled. Hunted. Whatever it is you did, your own people didn't want you." A flicker of something crossed her face, but she quickly buried it beneath a mask of control. "That doesn't mean I don't have value." He exhaled slowly, glancing toward the entrance of his shelter. The place was small, built from salvaged metal and stone, barely enough for one person, let alone two. But she wasn't wrong about one thing: being alone on this planet meant fighting every day just to keep going. Supplies didn't last forever. Resources ran low. And in the coldest nights, when the wind howled like a starving beast, warmth was as much a necessity as food or water. Still, he hesitated. "What exactly are you offering?" She stepped closer, and this time, he didn't move back. "Knowledge," she said, her voice softer now, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Skills beyond what your people understand. Strength that no human woman can match." There was something in the way she spoke, a confidence that went beyond mere survival. She wasn't pleading. She was negotiating. He studied her, weighing the risks. There was always a catch. Always a reason to say no. And yet, something about the way she stood before him, unyielding despite her weakened state, made him hesitate. "One night," he said finally, his voice rough. "You get one night inside. After that, we'll see." A slow exhale left her lips, but she didn't look relieved. She only nodded, as if she had already known he would agree. He turned without another word, stepping toward the shelter, leaving the door open just wide enough for her to follow. She did, moving past him with silent footsteps, her presence filling the space like a shadow stretching across the walls. The fire crackled softly, the only sound between them as she lowered herself onto the floor, her body rigid with exhaustion but her gaze sharp. He watched her for a long moment before sitting across from her, the heat between them the only thing warding off the cold. "Don't try anything," he warned, though his grip on his weapon had loosened. She met his eyes, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "I could say the same to you." The night stretched on, the wind outside relentless, the fire inside steady. And in the silence, something unspoken settled between them, an understanding, fragile and uncertain, but there nonetheless. For the first time in a long time, neither of them was alone. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows along the shelter's rough stone walls. The warmth it provided was a stark contrast to the relentless cold outside, where the wind howled through the barren landscape, sweeping over frozen rock and dust-covered ground. Inside, the air remained tense, thick with unspoken questions neither of them had dared to voice. She sat motionless near the flames, her violet skin catching the glow, making her appear almost otherworldly. Her silver eyes remained steady, unreadable, but the weight of exhaustion was evident in the way her shoulders sagged slightly. Despite the outward show of control, her body was still recovering from whatever trials had led her here. She had fought to survive long before arriving at his doorstep, and he could see the battle still waging within her. He leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed over his chest, studying her as much as he was watching for any sign of deception. Trust was something he had long since abandoned, carved out of him by years of solitude. There had been no one to rely on but himself, and that had suited him just fine. Until now. She met his gaze without hesitation, refusing to shrink under the scrutiny. "You don't ask many questions," she finally said, voice calm, measured. He shrugged, the movement barely perceptible. "Answers usually come with problems." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "And yet, you let me stay." "For now." Silence settled between them again, punctuated only by the occasional snap of the burning wood. Outside, the wind continued to rage, rattling against the metal panels of the structure, as if testing its strength. She shifted slightly, stretching her legs out toward the fire, letting the warmth seep into her aching muscles. "You asked before why I was cast out," she murmured. "Would you believe me if I told you I was punished for doing the right thing?" His expression didn't change. "Depends on whose version of right you mean." She exhaled slowly, the barest trace of amusement flickering across her face. "Fair point." He said nothing, waiting. She hesitated before continuing, as though the words themselves held weight she wasn't sure she wanted to share. "I saw what they wouldn't. A system built on control, blind to the cost. I refused to be part of it. They called it treason." He tilted his head slightly, considering her. "And you thought coming here was a better option?" A dry laugh escaped her. "No. I didn't choose this exile. It was meant to be a death sentence." His jaw tightened slightly at that, though he didn't comment. He understood what it meant to be discarded, cast aside by those who once mattered. The difference was, he had left by choice. She hadn't. "You still haven't explained what you meant earlier," he said, breaking the quiet. "About giving me something no human woman can." She studied him for a long moment before answering. "You're alone here. I can see it, feel it. You've built your world out of solitude, but you weren't meant to exist in isolation." His gaze remained steady. "And you think you understand what I need?" She shook her head. "No. But I understand what survival requires." He let the words settle, their meaning lingering in the firelit space. She wasn't offering herself in the way he had initially assumed. There was something deeper in her meaning, something less tangible but just as real. "Strength in numbers," he muttered. A slow nod. "You keep me alive, and I do the same for you." It was logical, pragmatic. And yet, there was something more to it. A silent agreement that went beyond mere survival. She wasn't just another being fighting to stay alive. She had a fire in her, a will that had refused to be extinguished even when her people had abandoned her. The storm outside was finally starting to die down, the howling winds losing their fury. But even as the silence of the night began creeping in, neither of them moved. After a long pause, he finally spoke. One night was the deal. Her expression remained unreadable. And now? His fingers tapped absently against the armrest of the chair beside him. He had spent years keeping others out, convinced that solitude was his only way forward. But now, sitting across from someone who had also lost everything, the weight of loneliness felt heavier than before. I haven't decided yet. She smirked faintly. Then I suppose I'll have to prove my worth. A flicker of something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or something unspoken neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The flames burned lower, casting softer light across the walls. Outside, the wind had finally stilled. For the first time in a long while, the night didn't feel quite so empty.